She escaped Diddy's private party, and what she saw inside will shock you. A young woman was invited to an exclusive party at Diddy's mansion, a party where only the Hollywood elite is accepted. But what seemed to be a night of glamour and luxury quickly turned into a dark nightmare. Muffles, locked doors, and obscure secrets. She saw things that should never have been seen and is now being chased for it. What really happens at the private parties of Diddy? Who is behind the threats? And the frightening, why no one talks about it? Get ready for a story that can cost more than your peace of mind. Watch it until the end before the video disappears. I don't even know where to start, but I think it all started when I received that invitation. I have no idea how they got my number, but a message appeared on my phone, unnamed, without identification, just saying, "You have been chosen to participate in a private party. Location and details will be sent after confirmation. Answer yes to secure your place." I was confused. I mean, why me? I am not a celebrity, nor do I have connections with these kind of people. But at the same time, I've always heard of these secret parties, private events for the richest and most powerful Hollywood. So, I answered yes. In a matter of seconds, another message came with the details. Thursday, 2200 hours. Black car will pick you up in front of the Four Seasons Hotel. No escort allowed. Code of dress, elegant. I was in shock. Everything seemed so organized and professional. Deep down, I knew this was not a simple party, but I was too curious to say no. So Thursday night, I put my best dress, black, fair, elegant, and went down to the hotel. Just at 10 p.m., a black car stopped in front. The driver said nothing, just opened the door. When I entered, he put a sail in my eyes and said, "It's just for security, miss." My heart shot, but for some reason I didn't fight it. I was nervous, but also intrigued. Where was I going? Who would be there? And most importantly, why me? After about 20 minutes driving, the car stopped. The driver took my sail, opened the door and said, "Welcome to the Diddy party." I got out of the car and was speechless. In front of me, there was a huge mansion, all lit by golden lights, with a red carpet leading to the entrance. Security guards dressed in black were aligned in line, inspecting each entering person. The mood was heavy, but I was too fascinated to go back. As I approached, one of the security guards looked at me from top to bottom, passed a metal detector through my body and asked, "Did you bring any mobile phones or recording device?" I shook my head nervously. He nodded to another security guard, which opened the mansion door. As I entered, I heard the security guard whisper to the other, "She's new." My heart beat so hard that I could hear the sound in my ears. I knew something was about to happen. I just didn't know what. When I entered the mansion, I was immediately hit by a deafening sound. The song was tall with a heavy beat that made the floor vibrate. Red and blues flashed irregularly, almost hypnotically. There was a strong smell in the air, a mixture of cigarette, expensive perfume, and something else that I couldn't identify. The hall was gigantic, with high ceilings decorated with crystal chandeliers that reflected the flashing lights. Velvet sofas were scattered in small groups, occupied by famous people I had only seen on TV or in magazines. There were waiters circling with champagne trays, but I realized that some of the cups had a different liquid, something that didn't seem like champagne. I was nervous, but I tried to look calm. I knew I could not show weakness in that place. As I walked through the hall, I felt people's eyes on me. Some expressions were curiosity, some of judgment. That's when a tall, blonde woman with a silver-tight dress approached me. She had a cold smile on her lips as she said, "You're new here, aren't you?" I just smiled back and waved my head. Before I could say something, she held my wrist hard and pulled me to the side, whispering in my ear, "Don't trust anyone here, especially in it." She dropped my wrist and walked away, mingling with the crowd. I stood for a moment, trying to sue what she had just said. Who was he? At that moment, a huge man dressed in black suit approached me and said, "Come with me. Someone wants to talk to you." I followed the security guard through a long corridor, away from music and the crowd. The walls were covered with old paintings, with dark figures that seemed to watch me as I passed. When we reached the end of the corridor, the security guard opened a door and said, "Between..." I hesitated for a second, but I entered. The room was dark, illuminated only by a lamp in a corner. In the center, sitting in a leather armchair, was Diddy. He wore an impeccable suit, sunglasses, and had a glass of whiskey in his hand. He watched me in silence, without smiling, without blinking. "So, are you the special guest of the night?" he said with a calm tone of voice, but loaded with a weight that made me uncomfortable. I smiled nervously and tried to answer, but before I could say anything, he continued. "Relax. If you're here, it's because you were chosen. Just enjoy." He waved his hand to the security guard, who left the room and closed the door behind me. I stood there not knowing what to do, while he stared at me in silence, with an enigmatic smile on his lips. That's when I realized I had made a mistake to come here. I don't know exactly how long I stayed in that room with him. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20, but it seemed like an eternity. The silence between us was so uncomfortable that I felt my heart hit my throat. Diddy watched me for a while, saying nothing. He sipped his whiskey, put the glass on the glass table, and then said, "You know, are you very beautiful? Has anyone told you that?" I just smiled nervously, not knowing how to answer. He got up slowly, walked to me, and put his hand on my shoulder. I froze. He leaned close to my ear and said, "Relax. I take care of my guests." Before I could react, the door opened. A tall woman with short hair and red dress entered the living room. She seemed hurried and whispered something in Diddy's ear. He nodded, gave me a last look, and said, "The party is just beginning." He left the room and the woman looked at me, evaluating me from the top to the bottom. "Are you well?" she asked without expression. I nodded, unable to form words. She reached out and I held her. "Come with me." She took me out of the room, back to the main hall. And that's when I started to realize what was really happening at that party. Nearly things looked like wrong. In a corner of the room, there were a group of older men surrounded by very young girls who seemed uncomfortable. Some not even appeared to be 18. They were sitting on sofas with glasses in their hands, but they didn't seem to be really drinking. Some of them had an empty look, as if they were completely out of themselves. In another area, a group of security guards formed a circle around a door. I saw 2 people being taken inside, a man and a woman. Both looked scared. When the door closed, I heard a muffled sound, something like a scream, or perhaps a request for help. I tried to walk the other side of the room, but the woman accompanying me held my arm and said, "Don't go there." "Why?" I asked. She looked at me with a serious face and said, "Some doors you don't want to open." Suddenly, I felt someone bump into me. A waiter carrying a tray of glasses almost dropped everything. He looked at me with wide eyes and whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I started to feel dizzy. The music was getting higher, the heavier atmosphere, and I realized that maybe something was in my drink. I went to the bar, trying to lean on the bench, and ordered a glass of water. The bartender, a suit guy with a cold expression, slid a glass toward me and said, "You should leave, while you can still." At that moment, I heard a loud noise from one of the corridors. Security guards ran there, and then the song stopped abruptly. The weather was tense. People began to whisper. I heard someone say, "She passed out." I looked to the side and saw a girl being carried by 2 security guards. She looked unconscious, her head down to the side. But no one seemed surprised. They just looked for a few seconds and talked again. I knew I had to leave. Something very wrong was happening. But leaving would not be as easy as I thought. I knew I had to leave, and fast. But by now I was Jumper. My vision was getting blurred and the sound around me seemed muffled, as if I were underwater. I walked away from the bar, trying to find a way out, but the mansion was a maze of endless corridors and locked doors. With every step I took, I felt that someone was watching me, and I wasn't wrong. As I walked toward the main area, I realized that some security guards began to move synchronously, as if they were strategically positioning themselves. They were surrounding the exits. It was at this moment that I heard a scream, a real cry. I turned and saw a girl running barefoot with a torn dress towards one exit. She was crying, desperate, and shouting, "Let me go! Let me out!" 2 security guards grabbed her by the arms and got her up as if she weighed nothing. She kicked and struggled, but they were too strong. I was paralyzed, not knowing what to do, as they dragged her to a dark corridor. The last thing I heard was the door closing behind them. I felt a knot in my throat. What was happening there? At that moment, Diddy appeared again. He came from a side aisle with a smile on his face, as if nothing had happened. He approached me and said calmly, "You look uncomfortable. Do you need something?" I forced myself to smile and said, "Actually, I need to go to the bathroom." He looked at me from the top to the bottom as if analyzing me, and then said, Of course. Madison, take our guest to the bathroom, please." The red-dressed woman, the same one who took me out of the room before, appeared beside him. She smiled artificially and waved to follow her. As we walked through a long, silent corridor, I heard strange sounds from behind a door. It looked like the muffled sound of people arguing or crying. I looked at Madison, who kept walking without expression, as if nothing was happening. Suddenly, the door beside us opened a little, enough for me to see what was happening inside. I saw a group of men sitting on sofas with drinks in my hands, laughing and talking, while a very young girl who looked completely out of her mind was kneeling on the floor, shaking. She was crying, and one of the men pulled her hair while the others laughed. Before I could react, Madison held my arm tightly and closed the door with a push. "You shouldn't have seen it," she said coldly. I let go and asked, "What is happening here? This is..." She put her finger on her lips and said, "Shh. You don't want to ask questions inside." I started to panic. My heart was beating so hard that I felt the blood throbbing in my ears. I knew that if I didn't leave at that moment, I would probably never leave. That's when the music stopped again. The lights got lower, and Diddy appeared again, this time accompanied by two huge men, security guards. He smiled and said, "Well, I think we're ready now for the most interesting part of the night." The double door at the end of the corridor opened, and I saw some people being driven inside by security guards. I recognized some faces, famous people. They looked apathetic, as if they were hypnotized. Diddy looked at me and said, "Are you ready?" My instinct shouted for me to leave that second, but the doors were closed. The security guards were blocking the exits. I had nowhere to run. But then I saw a service door ajar in the corner of the hallway. It was my only chance. My heart was beating so hard that I felt my wrist in my ears. I knew I had to get out of there. But how? The security guards were in all the main doors, and Diddy kept staring at me with that strange smile, as if he was testing me. The service door in the corner of the corridor was still ajar. I knew I wouldn't have another opportunity. I inspired deeply, trying to keep calm, and forced a smile as I said, I need a minute to breathe. Is everything okay?" Diddy tilted his head, analyzing me as if he was deciding something. Then he gave a half smile and said, "Sure, just don't go far." I waved and started walking slowly toward the service door, trying not to seem too hasty. Madison followed me with his eyes but did not move. The security guards were still stopped at the main exit. And that's when I realized the problem. One of them was positioned exactly in front of the service door. I was just a few steps from the door when a desperate idea came to my head. I took a glass of champagne from a nearby tray and on purpose dropped to the floor, making a loud noise. The security guard turned automatically to the noise. That was my chance. I ran. I opened the door hard and entered the service corridor. It was a narrow, dark, mold-smelling corridor. I heard voices behind me. Someone shouted, "Hey, for her!" I started running as fast as I could, with the jumps hitting the floor. I kicked the shoes away and kept running barefoot, without looking back. I went through an industrial kitchen, where employees looked at me with confused expression. A waitress tried to say something, but I kept running. I heard the sound of heavy steps behind me. The security guards were following me. So I saw a door at the end of the hallway with a sign that said emergency output. I ran toward the door and pushed it hard. The alarm fired immediately and I felt the cold air of the night hit my face as I went outside the mansion. But I wasn't saved yet. The property's iron gate was locked and the security guards were already coming by the hallway. I ran to the wall surrounding the place. He was at least 2 meters high and was covered by thorny plants. Without thinking, I started climbing. My bare feet slipped into the stones, and my knees were grating in the plants. I heard someone scream, "Take her!" I finally reached the top of the wall and jumped to the other side, falling on a dirt road. My leg hit the floor tightly and I felt a sharp pain climb through the ankle, but I got up and kept running. On the road, I saw 2 car headlights approaching. I raised my arms, shouting, "Help me, please!" The car stopped sharply. He was an app driver who had probably just left someone at the party. I opened the car door and entered, crying, shouting, "Go! Just drive!" The scared driver accelerated without asking questions. I looked at the rearview mirror and saw Diddy's security guards standing at the gate, watching the car away. They didn't try to follow, because they knew that if I could go out alive, no one would believe me anyway. While the car followed at high speed along the deserted road, the driver asked, "Are you okay? What happened there?" I couldn't answer. I was shaking with a wet face of tears and my heart still fired. All I managed to say was, "I need to get out of Los Angeles." I knew that after that night, I would never be safe again. I didn't sleep that night. The application driver left me in a cheap hotel, several kilometers away from Los Angeles. I paid money. I knew I couldn't use my credit card. I was paranoid. He looked at each passing person, every car he stopped in front of the hotel. I knew they could find me. The next morning, I took my phone to try to understand what had happened. I started looking for news about the party, about Diddy, about anything I could explain what I saw that night. Nothing. No photo, no video, no mention of the party anywhere. It was as if that night, it had never happened. But then, as I rolled the news feed, I saw something that made me freeze. A girl had been found dead. The body was discovered in a luxury hotel in Beverly Hills, and the cause of death had not yet been released. But the frightening was that her picture was from the same girl I had seen being carried by the security guards at the party, the one who was shouting to be loose. I knew what had happened. I started receiving strange messages on my phone. Unknown numbers, short and threatening texts. "You saw too much. Forget that night. You don't want to be next, right?" I was terrified. I disabled my phone, created a new email, deleted my social networks, and tried to disappear as much as possible. I even thought of going to another state, or maybe even to another country. But the worst was yet to come. 3 days later, I was in a coffee trying to act normally when a man entered and sat on the table next to mine. He wore a black suit, sunglasses, and had a headset in his ear. He put a white envelope on the table and slid it toward me without saying anything. I looked at the envelope, not understanding. He just said, "For you. Read carefully." I opened it right there. Inside was a picture of me, taken on the night of the party. I was on my back, entering the mansion. Someone had photographed me right now. Behind the photo, there was a message written by hand. "We know where you are, stay silent." I looked up at the man, but he had already come out of coffee. He had disappeared as if he had never been there. After that, I started to realize that it was being followed. Black cars parked near my building. I saw the same people appearing in different places, in the market, at the gym, even in front of my work. I even went to the police, but when I mentioned Diddy's name, the policeman was silent, looked at me for a long time and said, "You're playing with fire, forget it." I tried to tell some people, but no one believed in me. Who would believe? Who would have the courage to face someone with that level of power and influence? The messages were still coming. Some were just a word, silence. Others were more direct. "If you open your mouth, you end up like her." I realized that there was only one way out: disappear completely. I moved to a small town in the middle of nowhere, not to mention anyone. I deleted what was left of my social networks and stopped using credit cards. But even now, months later, I still have the feeling that I'm being observed. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that there is someone in my room, but when I turn the light, there is no one there. And the worst of all, I know they can find me, anytime. I thought about telling the media everything, exposing what happened that night, but what if they are waiting for it? What if this is the last thing I do? So I just have one thing to say to you that you are listening to this. If you ever receive an invitation for a private Diddy party, don't go, because you may not be as lucky I had.